Hello, welcome to Light from Light. My name is Daniel and his name is Brother Thomas Therese. Today we thought it'd be interesting to speak about a book that both of us have read by Greene called The Power and the Glory. And it's a beautiful novel that both of us have enjoyed, but it's also a very haunting novel. So it follows a priest in Mexico during a real anti-Catholic time in the 1930s. So we're going to get into that book and dig into the story and the main theme really around it. We just invite you to subscribe to the podcast, share this episode with anyone who might find it helpful as well, and let us know, have you read the book before and what were your thoughts about it? For anyone who hasn't come across the novel before, bit of a spoiler, but the novel follows the story of a Catholic priest who's on the run in the 1930s in the region of Tabasco State in Mexico. And the government has outlawed the church, outlawed the practice of the faith, and the main character, we don't know his name, but he is the last practicing Catholic priest in that state, in that region. And he's on the run. Other priests who have been on the run at that time have been killed for their faith, and others have been pensioned off or married off to stop them from really practicing the faith. But he's a deeply flawed character as well. So the book explores the flaws around his character, the weight of sin, but then grace and holiness really coming through in his life and in his practice of the faith. Brother Thomas, you haven't really been a fan of novels or read many novels in the past. What made you pick up this particular book?
Well, it's actually that you'd recommended it to me was the reason why I decided to read it. I was in a charity shop. And I saw this book and it had a picture of the rosary on the front. I thought, oh, what's that? And then I recognised the title from something you'd recommended to me. So yeah, that's why I picked it up and I flicked through it, and it's very good. Really enjoyed it. It was, and I also wanted to try to read more literature, more novels rather than, because I tend to read either children's books to try to de-stress or to forget about things in the day, like things like Paddington Bear or Roald Dahl, something like that. Or the other thing that I tend to read is theology or papal history, things like that. But more recently, since I moved to Edinburgh, I decided that I'd read more things like Great Expectations by Charles Dickens and things like that. And yeah, since you recommended it to me, I thought, why not? Yeah, see how it goes.
But although this book's a novel, though, it is based on history. It's a novel. I think.
Set in a historical context in the 30s, as you say, during anti-Catholic persecution, Yeah,
and there's a bit of a reaction. The government has suppressed the faith, but then the people rise up in resistance against that. And then you find this war takes place, the Cristero War, and they take for their sort of clarion. Their call of faith, long live Christ, isn't it? Viva Christ Rey, long live Christ the King. So they take that up. So it's known as the Cristero War. And what's interesting, Greene was a journalist, and he was a convert to the Catholic faith. But as a journalist, he was sent to Mexico, and the Cristero War wasn't very well known at all. Certainly, in Europe. But Greene goes to Mexico and he sees the devastation of the land, the devastation of the people, suppression of any sort of connection to the Catholic faith at all. And all of this, it was real and it was taking place. And he goes back and he keeps a diary during that time, and that gets produced. And it's called the Lawless Roads. But it was this novel, The Power and the Glory, that really highlighted this time in the history, this historical time in Mexico, which is quite stark, really, that we didn't know. Didn't know much about it at the time, but he really highlighted it.
I think if you think about a lot of those more modern sort of civil wars, because of course, you're right, a lot of the people did sort of rise up, but many of them supported the government. That's how the government, that's how the government was able to do what it did, was with support of many people. And the priests who were pensioned off, they had to marry someone And so they, of course, were also supporting the regime. For many of the priests, of course, it would have been, fear for their lives and changing in the social order and the social fabric of things.
It must have been it must have been like that for the people as well, though. For some people, they would have been in fear of the government. And
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. Because what Graham Greene speaks about in his diary is finding a secret underground church, which really surprised him.
Yeah.
Being so far away from Mexico, in Europe, and then traveling there, finding a underground secret church that they, met in secret, kept the faith secretly, which was quite interesting. But you're right, there were sympathizers with the government.
And many in the Anglophone world don't really know much about the Cristero War, because it takes place on another continent at a time when, people are focusing on other things in European history. Similarly, with the Spanish Civil War, very often people in Northern Europe, in the Anglophone world at least, people don't really realize actually what happened during the Spanish Civil War, if they even realize that there was one, and the awful things that had happened during the Civil War in Spain. Yeah, and that was actually very recent, the 1900s.
So it's set in a historical context, but it really is a spiritual drama. It's a novel. This priest, his name isn't even mentioned throughout the novel, but it's a spiritual drama, if you like. It follows his life, but it also follows a number of different characters who are throughout the book. What could you say about the Whisky priest, about his character, good and bad?
Well, I think it really shows how, the old phrase, God can write straight with crooked lines, always St. Paul puts it, that we carry treasure in earthen vessels, that even in the brokenness of our lives and of our humanity, God's grace finds a way to seep through the cracks, and as fragile as we may be, we can still have this tremendous relationship with God by the grace of God, and can still pursue the path to holiness. In spite of our flaws and our failings. In the book, he's had an affair with a woman and fathered a child. He's racked by his own guilt at not having the courage to be a martyr. There's a time where he sort of walked past the places where, priests who he knew were shot and martyred for the faith, and he laments the fact that he lacked their courage, and he takes this as a sign, really, that he doesn't have their holiness. Then there's another priest, of course, in the book, who has married off, been pensioned off, and he cuts a bit of a pathetic figure, really, a very sad figure, a compromised figure. He's there with his new wife. The children all make fun of him because they know that he was a priest, and they know that priests aren't supposed to get married. And at least in the Latin tradition, from for centuries now. So yeah, and he's not really either. So he feels like he lacks courage in both senses. He lacks the courage to sort of run away and get pensioned off, marry off, and this puts his life in danger. But he knows he's doing the right thing, and I think in that you see his desire to be a saint. There's this desire to do the right thing, but he's racked by fear and very conscious of his own weakness. And yet he's not like that priest, but he's also not like the others who've been shot. And at the beginning of the book, where you find him is he's trying to escape. He's trying to flee for his life. And it's actually, oddly, the fidelity to his vocation in small things that saves his life. And this is where you see that theme of providence, I think, coming in. So the kid comes to him at the beginning when I think he's in a dentist surgery, is that right? And this kid comes to him and says, my mother's not well, and the priest, says, his mother's perfectly fine, because he knows that actually what they're asking for is mass and the sacraments and things. And he's thinking, if I just get on that boat, I'll be sailing away to the big city and I'll be safe. And what you find out later, about halfway through the book, spoiler alert, what you find out later, halfway through the book, is actually the police were waiting for him on the boat. And if he was caught then they would have either recanted, his priesthood or been shot. And it's not quite clear whether he had the strength at that time to have become a martyr, to be a witness to the faith in that way, or whether he would have capitulated and then, his soul would have been in danger. So there's this question about, in his participation in his vocation in small ways, in spite of his fragility and his weakness, not wanting to go with the child, but doing it anyway, to look after his flock, that oddly saves his life long enough that by the end of the book, he's in I don't want to say what the ending is, but he's in a different place than what he is at the beginning. And you wonder, was that God's, well, I think that's the whole point, that it's God's providence and it's God's grace, and that he was granted the grace ultimately to become a saint by the end of the book. And he can look his weakness and his flaws in the face and not be cowed by them, but relying on the grace and the fidelity of God, So, yeah.
It's interesting though that you mentioned he has this contrast between someone that priest who left the faith, left the practice of the faith, got married, left the practice of being a priest, and then he's got the contrast with the martyrs. And I was just thinking, as you said that he's a man who struggles with his with this call, this contrast. And I had in mind really that the saints are not those who live perfect lives,
Absolutely.
right? But so what makes them saints then? If they don't live perfect lives, there's still accounts of them falling short. So what makes them saints? What makes the church declare that they're saints, or what makes their life holy?
I think it's that their lives become perfected by God's grace, that ultimately they don't rely on their own powers or their own goodness, but ultimately they're defined by the goodness of God in their lives, So you do see elevated virtue in their life, but you're right. I mean, St. Augustine, when he's a young man, says, Lord, make me chaste, but not yet. But as he goes on, he does grow in that virtue of chastity. But ultimately, of course, St. Augustine doesn't save himself. St. Augustine is saved by the merits and the passion of Jesus Christ, and he chooses to participate in that divine life, in that grace. But even Augustine's ability to participate with God's grace is itself a grace from God.
So is that so for the whiskey priest, that beginning scene that you laid out? He's in the dentist place, and he goes to reluctantly. He doesn't want to go, but he goes to minister to that lady. Does he change over time so that you start to see? In your mind, does he change over time where he starts actually to desire to do these things, the right things?
That is a very interesting question. I mean, certainly at the end of the book, he is prepared to do what he thinks is right and to look evil in the eye and confront it as Christ confronted it, like a lamb led to slaughter, So he becomes a Christ-like figure. Obviously, he's not perfect like Christ is perfect, but nevertheless, he becomes a Christ-like figure, I think, by the end of the book. There's this beautiful scene where he's really tired and he goes to this village, and there's a man there who he's, running for his life. He's exhausted, and he gets to this house of this man, and he says, "Oh, Father, we haven't seen a priest in such a long time. Will you hear my confession? Will you say a mass for us?" He said, in the morning, and he wants to go to bed, and then the man won't stop talking. And in the end, the priest says, "Fine, I'll hear your confession." And he hears his confession, and it's a long confession because it's been a while. And then he goes out to the women outside and says, "Oh, Father, we'll hear your confessions." He says, No, let me sleep. And then the women are like, no, we'll wait. And he's like, "But Father's come all this way, And so in the end, this priest who's exhausted, and he's, probably every fiber of his being is crying out with that same exhaustion. And yet, nevertheless, he participates in the work of God.
He chooses to do what's right.
Yeah.
I remember that there was a priest recently who was telling me that he went off to this really far. He was telling a story where this priest went off to this really far away island. And the history of the island was that there were no Catholics. You know, there had never been any Catholics there. But he was told to go there, and he didn't think he'd find anything there. And he travels on this really long journey. It takes days on this boat, and he arrives, and he thinks, oh, no one's going to be there. You know, it's dangerous, really, to go there. And then he's flocked by about 100 people.
Wow.
Loads of children, loads of parents and grandparents all flock to him for them to hear his confession, and he's thinking, but no priest has ever been here before. How was this the case? And it turned out it was a lady like that in this novel who had gone there, who'd married, and then the husband had become a Catholic, and they'd handed on the faith to basically the whole island.
Wow. Yeah.
So this faraway island had become Catholic, and they'd never received the sacraments. But they saw in the priest this opportunity to encounter, Jesus, encounter Christ through these sacraments, which is what that story that Greene is telling there. But
I think with would it have been morally wrong for him to say, in the morning? Well, not really. Would the priest have been morally wrong to have slept and then had all the confessions in the morning? No. Blessed Dominic Barbary, when he comes out to meet John Henry Newman by the fireplace in Littlemore, he gets halfway through Newman's life story, essentially, and he says, we're going to have to continue this in the morning because, I'm exhausted. It was raining a lot, and he was exhausted from his journey. So would it have been morally wrong for him to wait till the morning? No. But is this a sign of his heroic virtue? Yes, it is. And we shouldn't make the perfect the enemy of the good, At the same time, this is a sign of extraordinary virtue, because that goodness and that virtue is shown not merely in your desire or how you feel about doing something, but what you actually choose to do. You may be beset with temptations and weaknesses and things, but what do you choose to do with your life? He had chosen not to become like the priest who was pensioned off. That was also a sign that God's grace was already active in his life. But I don't think he himself, because he's so conscious of his weakness, I don't think he himself was able to trace the fingerprint of God through all of these events in his life. And I think Greene invites the reader to do that on his behalf. Yeah.
But that's like many of us. We don't see the guiding hand of God through our life, especially in the moments as well. It's interesting because Greene is also a very troubled character, a troubled man himself. He struggles with his faith and the practice of the faith. And it's long documented as well about his life. Just going back to that scene then, so when everyone approaches this priest, the Whisky priest, and they're asking for confession, and there's this dialogue going on, but he sees like the desperation of them. They're desperate to receive Jesus's forgiveness through the priest. They're desperate for that, and then he chooses to do the right thing. He sees their hunger, and I was thinking it's Christ-like in that when Christ is tired and hungry and the people are coming to him, he decides to minister to them. So it's Christ-like.
His compassion overcomes his fatigue, essentially, and again, it's putting his hand to the plow. And not looking back. As I said a second ago, that heroism, that virtue, that goodness, that grace is shown precisely in what he does. So it's quite clear that actually God is with him, even though he is fragile as we all are. And I think that's a lesson that we can all take comfort from.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what would that look like? Do you think for a layperson, maybe a mother? Who has a number of children, or as someone who's working up in the city, or maybe someone who doesn't have a job and they're struggling.
Yeah.
What does that look like in practice for?
I think the sins of the clergy and the sins of the laity very often are the same sins, and that call to discipleship and the call to be faithful to your vocation, even if it looks slightly different, you may get, frustrated and tired, dealing with your children. But the fact that you're looking after your children is a sign that actually you're participating with God's grace and participating in your vocation. There was, I think it was St. Francis de Sales wrote to a lady who said, "Oh, I feel very guilty, Bishop, that I can't come to Mass. And every day, I'm looking after my children, and I find it really hard to get them ready. And you can imagine them sort of like bouncing off the walls. And she had many children, and the bishop wrote to her saying, well, you're not a nun, so why would you want to, why should you do the things that nuns do? Your spirituality should be the spirituality of a mother. God has given you these children to look after, and as frustrated and as tired as you may be, in looking after them, you're participating in God's grace and you're growing in holiness. You may feel, tired. You almost certainly will feel tired, exhausted. You may feel angry at times, but actually, the fact you look after these children who God has entrusted into your care is a sign that you are actually growing in holiness because you're doing what He has asked you to do.
And that you're in the right place. You're where God has called you.
There's no great secret to it. It's doing simply what He has asked you to do. And doing that to the best of your ability, and it will be frustrating and it will be tiring. If you think about other vocations, I think it's the same thing. All of us sin. I always say each and every one of us has our favorite sin that we keep going back to, whatever that may be, whether it be lying or gossip or whatever it is. People have their same favorite sins that they go back to, and yet nevertheless, God's grace can still be active and present in their life as He's drawing them back to Himself. And the sort of sins they struggle with in their 20s, in their 40s, in their 50s, hopefully by the time they get, to the end of their life, whenever that may be, hopefully they're in a better place than what they were before. But even then, they're ultimately defined by God's love for them and by Christ's sacrifice rather than their sinfulness.
Was it John Paul II that said you're not the sum of your weaknesses?
Yeah.
Is that right?
But the Father's love for you. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah, so you're defined by your relationship with God. I heard the other day someone said you're defined by what God has bestowed upon you. And what He's bestowed upon us is, sonship and daughtership, His own life. Yeah, He's brought us into life with God.
Yeah.
So that is our deepest identity, is that we are in relationship with God. Profound thought.
Yeah.
One of the other main characters in the book is the lieutenant. Do you remember much about him and his role in the book?
From what I remember, you're going to be able to correct me. From what I remember about the lieutenant, he used to be an altar server, right? And he is that right? So when you said that, I was like, oh, that's wrong. I think he used to be an altar server, and he's looking for this priest, and he's come to. He's had a very difficult relationship, obviously, with the church, and now he's become one of the prosecutors and persecutors of the church, and he spends the whole. It's a bit like Jean Valjean and Javert in Les Mis.
Yeah, that's I got the same sort of vibe.
Same vibes.
Yeah.
He's it's like cat and mouse. He's chasing him throughout the whole of the novel, but at the end, of course, they come face to face, and there is the showdown between these two opposite characters.
Yeah, and what I find quite interesting is by the end of the book, there's a showdown, but the Whisky priest has come a long way. His character has developed. He's grown in virtue, and
but he doesn't rely on his own goodness. And I think that certainly in Les Mis, that's what you find with in Les Miserables. That's what you find with Javert. Javert is convinced of his own righteousness, whereas actually Jean Valjean is convinced of his own need of mercy, and he's been shown that mercy, of course, by the bishop. So you have one which is a view of almost self-righteousness, even though Javert talks about God. It's very much those who follow the path of the righteous will have their reward, and it's very I'm doing the right thing. And actually, in the end, it's when he shows mercy to Jean Valjean at the end that he starts thinking that because I haven't followed the law, the law of what? Law of grace. because not the law of grace is the point. Because I haven't followed the law, I've now transgressed the law, and now I deserve to die. And so then he commits suicide. And so there is this this sense in which he misunderstands God's grace and God's mercy, relying upon himself and not upon God.
So the lieutenant is a similar thing. He's relying on himself to track down the whiskey priest and to be the law, really, to be.
But does he even believe in God anymore? Right? I mean, like,
well, yeah, that's the question that's raised. Yeah, from the novel. What was the most poignant thing you took from the book?
Well, the thing that I resonated with the most was when he goes to hear the confessions and the yes, and he's tired, and yet people are constantly like coming to him. I think that really resonated with me, but because I think in that you see the fatherhood that's present in the priesthood. One of my parishioners in Edinburgh said just before I left, because obviously I've left Edinburgh now, said just before I left, at first I thought I'm not going to call this man father because he's half my age. That'd be absolutely ridiculous. But after spending 2 years there, she said, "No, I will call him father."
Because you look a lot older.
Because I've gone grey. Yeah. She said, "I will call him father." And actually, she didn't explain what she meant at the time. Then later, we went out for breakfast, and we did get talking about it. And I explained something of what I'd learned about fatherhood while I was there. And one of those things is people come to you all the time about big things, but also about really little things, and a bit like children come to their parents,
And you nurture them, and you.
Yeah. They want somebody to chase away the shadows, and sometimes those monsters in the cupboard are fictitious, but sometimes there are serious things that you have to be able to step into to try to bring some healing and comfort. So I really resonated with that on a personal level. Also, the fact that he is a very flawed and weak priest. I think every priest is very conscious of their own sinfulness,
Their own weaknesses.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But that's interesting. Something that I resonated with as well, because being a married man, my vocation is different from his. But I'm aware of my own weakness, and I'm aware that I can be like him in that I can be exhausted, tired, not wanting to do the right thing,
grumpy.
Yeah. Okay, Kim, sure.
Kim's his wife.
But I can be like that, and I can be grumpy and emotional, and not want to do the right thing. And would it be morally right to say I'm going to go to bed because I'm exhausted? I'm not going to cook dinner. I've had dinner myself. She can look after herself. That's, you can morally justify that, right? On a singular level. Yeah. But the vocation.
You make me think now about what I said earlier about the confession. Yeah. My conscience is being pricked.
Would it be morally right if he went to bed? The thing is, when you were saying that about St. Dominic Barbary, the thing is, when he arrives, he's come in from the outside. He's soaked. There's a hot fire going.
It's late at night, so
late. And he's gone there to talk to John Henry Newman. But probably the next day, and then John Henry Newman falls on the ground on his knees and says, "Receive me into the church now before I change my mind."
Exactly.
So I was thinking, Saint Dominic Barbary does actually sit down with him, and they speak for a long time.
For a while.
Yeah, a long time into the early hours of the morning. Yeah.
I think does he arrive around midnight, something like that?
Yeah, he arrives very late.
And then it's a long time. Yeah. But I mean, you're right. I think fundamentally the importance is do not be discouraged by it, because the thing that we can all fall into is feeling discouraged by our own weakness, our own sinfulness, and then actually running away from our vocation because we're worried, because we're anxious, because we're frightened by our own sinfulness, or ashamed of our own sinfulness, and so then we can try to hide or like hunker down and sort of be on our own. But actually, what we need to do is recommit ourselves to those things. So, not being discouraged by our own weakness, but remembering that no matter what we've done, no matter what sinfulness we have, no matter what sins we've committed in our life, what our weaknesses are, God's grace, God's mercy is always more powerful. It's always greater than anything that we could do, infinitely greater because of who God is. And that's the thing. So sometimes we can, St. Augustine Cavatus can say, like, we turn in on ourselves and we focus on what we've done rather than what God has done. And that then becomes a problem. So the point of the novel, I think, is don't be discouraged by these by your weaknesses. Yes, fight them. Yes, the priest never gets to a moment where he doesn't feel sorry for his weakness and the things that he's done wrong. But I think he's able to look that in the eyes because he starts to remember what God has done for him.
And also who God is. God is not there waiting for him to fail.
Yeah.
And God is there ready to receive him into his arms. Yeah. Brilliant. I think that's a really good way to end the episode. Thank you for joining us for this episode. We'll be, please God, back soon with another episode. So please subscribe and tell us what marked you, what struck you about the episode today or about the book. Thank you.